It's my great pleasure, my great honor to introduce Laura Fruggeri, who comes all the way from Italy. Laura is trained by the Milan approach, trained by Gianfranco Cecchin, Boscolo, etc. And ever since, she's been a prominent figure in the world of systemic thinking. Systemic thinking, which is, in my opinion, is more than just ideas and techniques. It's an approach to life. She's not very tall, but she has a great heart, and we are very pleased, Laura, to welcome you.
The two extremes.
Yeah. Welcome.
I want to thank the colleagues of Metalog for inviting me to this, that I understand is a very important event for the community and for the community of professionals in Denmark. The first time they contacted me, it was 2019. And as we all know, then the world changed. So the conference was postponed and postponed and postponed. And every time I would adjust my abstract and my ideas about what to say today. But then lately, they told me that there is this important proposal in the country, in Denmark, about the program and services of child psychiatry. And they also told me how they eagerly are against this and want to fight about it and at least open a discussion and some reflections. So at that point, I thought that I wanted to join the discussion and maybe, add some ideas that I hope they will be useful. So I added a subtitle to the title I gave at the beginning. And the subtitle, as you see, is Psychiatry and Systemic Practice Working Beyond the Borders of Dualism. I think that the systemic approach, as the colleagues think, can be a good guideline for working in a different way within the psychiatric field. My experience has developed both as a therapist and a consultant in the field of adult psychiatry. And in fact, the idea that I will present and the examples that I will describe come from that area. But in a way, I think that they are some general methodological principles that can then use, changing context also in child psychiatry or in general in social psychological interventions. Okay, today psychiatry and systemic therapeutic practice seem to follow divergent paths. The professional discourse that is now mainstream in psychiatry is characterized by the tendency to individualize, to pathologize, and biologize the nature of human mental illness and distress. And this is true all over the Western world. In Denmark, I think in other Scandinavian countries, in Italy, in UK, in Ireland, in US, all over the Western world. On the other side, the systemic approach is a perspective based on sensitivity to context, recursivity, circular causality, interconnection, relationships, collaboration, and dialogue. The systemic approach perspective has transformed the way of thinking of some notions which are at the base of the psychiatric intervention, and they are symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment. Now, symptoms are not, for the systemic approach, are not the expression of an individual dysfunction, but they are rather an information about the relational context of the client. Diagnosis is not conceived as the attribution of pathological categories to an individual, but it refers to how a group functions. Treatment for the biological psychiatry are mainly drugs, medications, and hospitalization. Systemic approach operate to change the context within which the problem has emerged. As the colleagues has pointed out before, even the idea is not just to help or change one person, but to change the context within which the person lived and within which the distress has emerged and has been maintained. And the approach to treatment is dialogical and collaborative. Now, I want to say, just to begin to overcome dualism, that I don't see the use of medication and hospitalization in contraposition to the practice of psychotherapy in a systemic approach. Sometimes both can be necessary. The point, again, is how do we think about them, how do we use them, and how do we talk about them with our clients. If we think at a larger level, let's say, mainstream psychiatry is, as it is now, is certainly the result of the neoliberal turn of the last decades in terms of organization and planning of the social and health services. But I think that we also have to think of ourselves. One thing that is important in the systemic thinking is to include ourselves in the analysis that we do. So if on one side we have to recognize that there is a mainstream political approach that has conducted to what we know as evidence-based control, numbers, statistics, and so on. On the other side, I think that there is an issue of being credible and convincing professional working in psychiatric field that our model can be effective to respond to their need to be effective with clients. We have to recognize that the mental health is it's not only a complex field of intervention, but it's also a very hard field of intervention. Clients are most of the time aggressive, self-destroying, they talk nonsense, they are not compliant. So I think it's a field that we have to recognize that professionals have to deal with a lot of sufferance and despair. Now, traditional psychiatry is often a simplified answer to this kind of complexity, which is not just a structural complexity, it's also an emotional complexity. It's also something linked to the identity of people, working in the field. Now, today I would like to illustrate some methodologies inspired by the systemic practice that can be proper for dealing with the complexity without simplifying it. I would like to take on the invitation that Jörn just did of going explore further the word complexity, go into it and see what we can do to deal with it. I believe, I'm a passionate systemic professional, and I believe that the systemic practice can have some answer, to deal with complexity, as I said, without simplifying it. But before that, I think that we also need to address some questions. And the questions are these: is a collaborative, co-generative, dialogical model, as the systemic approach is, credible in the field of mental health, where professionals deal with very daunting cases, face despair and nonsense most of the time? What do dialogue and collaboration mean in this kind of context? How can we have sometimes a dialogue when all we see is despair, and most of the time we ourselves feel powerless? Okay? Why do I raise this question? Because I believe that these are the questions that the founders of the systemic movement, or of those whose work brought to the systemic movement, addressed in the 60s and 70s of last century. The founders that addressed this issue, they challenged the traditional psychiatry. You can see them: Boscolo, Jackson, Ackerman, Lyman-Wynne, Waslevik, Bateson, Chikhin, Salvini, Sullivan, Minuchin, Virginia Satir, Lang, Wickland, and Frida from Reichman, Halley, Leeds, Bowen, Basaglia, Whittaker. They all worked in the psychiatric field. Most of them were psychiatrists. And what they did is something that we owe to them, our profession now, because what they did is they proved that it is possible to make sense of what the traditional psychiatry and common sense considered nonsense. Now, I think that they showed how behind labels there are meanings. They just didn't say it, they showed it. They did research on that. They showed with example cases, descriptions of interventions. They transformed symptoms in voices. That is, they transformed something incomprehensible in claims, needs, requests that could be then addressed and welcomed. Madness was redefined as communication, and despair was transformed in hope. These are, I think, the new keywords that they, delivered to us. And I think that we are still, very grateful for this heritage. The legacy of this rich clinical heritage is, in a few words, the need for the search for meaning. The search for meaning is a central issue in the psychiatric practice, because the search for meaning implies the acknowledgement of the dignity of people, of the dignity of clients. And the goal is not controlling behaviors, but overcoming the distress by understanding the meanings behind behaviors. As a whole, the founders offer a perspective that is collaborative, co-evolutionary, dialogical, as much as it acknowledges the subjectivity of the client. I mean, collaboration, dialogue, co-construction, co-generation are all words that implied not just an attitude, not just a way of talking, but the beliefs in the subjectivity of the clients, whose behaviors are meaningful. And I think that once we recognize that others' behaviors are meaningful, then our actions become meaningful as well in a meaningful relationship. And this is a completely different vision with respect to traditional psychiatry, than behind a label actually hide almost everything, and things lose their sense. The search for meaning is an antidote to reification, marginalization, exclusion, and blame of persons who suffer from psychological distress. But it's also, I think, an antidote to burnout of professionals who, in fact, as I said, once they see meanings in the client's behavior, they can consider themselves in a meaningful relationship. Okay, the notion of making sense and search for meaning leads us to the notion of curiosity. Curiosity, as Chikin underlined, is wondering about the relational context that makes sense of what is apparently, senseless. It is a search for meaning, curiosity. Curiosity means raise questions about the stories of people, about their context. It's only knowing context, stories, that we have some reference point for also understanding the meanings behind behaviors. In clinical practice, being curious means developing a deep interest in the lives of people, not in their symptoms, but in their lives. Means taking a position that encourages clients to tell their stories of their life instead of, the prevailing story told by the institution that usually treat them. Curiosity means to acknowledge the client's subjectivity, no matter what the conditions of the clients are, or we should say, especially when the conditions of the clients appear desperate. Because then is the moment that we can only save ourselves and the client by a search of meaning. Let me give you an example. Louis is 50 years old and lives with his parents. His mother is 78 years old and his father is 82. Louis, since he was a young adult, has been received assistance by the local mental health service. Now, even if still under medication, he has a job, lives a simple life with the support of his parents. The situation disrupted when Louis' fathers developed dementia. The mother must take care of two persons, both in need of assistance. She then consults with the psychiatrist and says, I'm not going to take care of both of them. I just cannot cope with it. So the psychiatrist suggested and did to become a guest of a residential rehabilitation center. So someone could take care of the, controlling the medication, but also he could take part of the activities of the community and take a rest from a stressful situation at home. The decision seemed to be good. Louis was socializing with the other guests. He would take care of, participate in the activities of the community, like, setting the table, cleaning, and things like that. So everything was so good that the professional thought, well, it's time for him to go home and pay a visit to his parents. And so they did. However, once back from this visit, Louis seemed to be regressed in many respects. He refused to attend the community activities as he used to do before, but overall, he exhibits the following behavior. He constantly checks his underpants and asks anyone he meets to do the same, to be reassured that he has not wet himself. The persistence of this behavior triggered a crisis in the community because nurses and doctors began to think that Louis was going crazy. They didn't understand, this kind of behavior. And the other guests get annoyed and angry at him. So the thing is that the entire community began to take excluding, marginalizing position against Louis. The professional asked for a consultation with the supervisor, with me, in order to make sense of what they just thought it was an incomprehensible regression, and they could only qualify Louis' behavior in terms of pathology, to the point that they were thinking that the community was not the right place for him because he had to be, instead hospitalized in a psychiatric ward. During the supervisory session, professionals are invited to report their observations and explore ideas about aspects that could be linked to this behavior. So someone commented, well, this reminds of a child who fears of wetting himself. Someone else said, well, it's a good idea, it's a good interpretation, but where does this fear come from all of a sudden? So the nurse that took Louis home said, well, what I saw was that mother was very happy to see him, and when I went back to get Louis, they said that everything went very well. So, even more incomprehensible. But then the nurse said, actually, once we were in the car and I was commenting about how the visit had been good, Louis told me that he had offered to help mother clean the house, and mother has said, oh, don't bother, I'll do it when you're gone. So at that point, something kind of clicked in all of us, and we thought, oh, but this is the second time that Louis has offered to help, and his offer was not accepted. Because when the father started, suffering for dementia, actually, Louis quit his job, sat at home, arguing with his father. So we thought maybe he quit his job and sat at home thinking of helping mother to deal with his father. So every time that Louis had offered to help mother as a grown-up son would do, his help was refused. So not that, mother thought of belittle him, but actually he probably felt to be invalidated in his offer and saw in his identity of a grown-up son and felt like a child. So these ideas that came from the observation and from knowing the story of Louis became topics for conversations and dialogues in meetings with Mother and Louis about how each of them could help each other and could take care of each other. And these meetings were, moment where both Louis and Mother could reveal emotions, expectations, desire, and this was what helped to the process that then brought Louis back home, where he is still. So I think that this intervention shows how it's a good intervention for the client. It's a good intervention for the context of the client, because Mother could see the situation with different eyes, but was also a good opportunity for the professional to grow from a situation where all they could see was pathology and something like that. They became creative and were able to start a dialogical, relationship, interaction with this, with Louis and his mother. So curiosity, I think, protects professional from objectifying and marginalizing the client, and take instead a dialogical, respectful, and inclusive position. Curiosity is also supported by the distinction between reasons and solutions. This is an important distinction that I think we should keep in our mind, and this helps us to become curious about meanings and points of view of our clients. What does it mean distinguishing reasons from solutions and goals from strategies? Well, I have this premise that people act in a meaningful way. So people usually have reasons for doing things. And of course, they have goals according to these reasons. And so what they do is that they look for solutions and also enact strategies. The point is that reasons and goals can be legitimate, but the solution could be dysfunctional and strategies could be ineffective. I think that most of the time our clients are in this situation. They start from legitimate reasons that could be needs, desires, needs in terms of being loved, protected, or goals, to reach some purpose. But most of the time, because of the situation they lived in, the context they live in, this solution appear to be dysfunctional, not in terms of absolute, but with respect to the context. Now, the point is that most of the time we focus on the solution found by clients, that is the behaviors they enact, and don't think of the reason for that behavior. As I said, our clients most of the time come from very marginalized contexts where the solutions that are available are not many. So they kind of take whatever they find there. And this solution might, appear to be dysfunctional, which is what then bring them into further marginalization, exclusion, and everything that we know. So I think that distinguishing this is important. Let me give you an example, and then we'll take 5 minutes for you to think about these ideas before we continue. Now, the story is Lily's story. She's a young woman who is hospitalized in a ward because of drug addiction. She is young, 25 years, and she is there just for the detoxification, and then from there she's supposed to move to a rehabilitation community. Now, the doctors think that Lily is now ready to move to the rehabilitation community. But in a team discussion, nurses said, absolutely not. No, you don't see, you see her in your room, and you don't see her in her life in the world like we do. And what we see is that she's all the time seductive with everyone going, and they caught her having sexual intercourses with other patients in the ward, in the unit. So the nurses said, if she has these behaviors, she shows to be really a drug addict. This is a typical drug addict behavior, which means that she is not ready to deal with the program of the rehabilitation center. Now, the idea was that the nurses thought that she would lie and seduct the doctors when talking with her, and they had the real vision on what she was. The doctor thought that this was very, pathologizing, and they thought that instead, talking to Lily, they could see that she really wanted to take care of herself. So the nurses thought, oh, come on, take care of herself. It's that the way to take care of herself, having all these intercourses with anyone. Now, so they asked for a supervision because they didn't know actually at that point what to do. It's interesting that the doctor thought that there was no way of making a power, movement saying, no, what we see is right, because they were also considering what the nurses would underline. Now, so when we met for the supervision, I said, why don't we raise different questions? The question, is Lily lying? Has no answer. And the other question, who is right? Who's seeing the real thing? Also is unuseful because it brings into conflicts and nothing else. So what I said, I suggested a different kind of question, and that are, from what perspective does Lily behavior make sense? What motivation might lead Lily to present herself as a sexual object? And overall, in what way can we consider the promiscuous sexual behavior as a way to take care of herself? Because this is the challenge. This is exactly the challenge, to recognize that the behaviors that we consider pathology, nonsense, and so on, for our clients could be seen as a way to pursue their needs and goals. From this perspective, of course, all of a sudden, Lily was not a liar anymore, did not appear a liar anymore. And someone said that probably the need she had was being loved. And her behavior was just an inappropriate strategy to pursue such a goal. And at that point, all the professionals were together in seeing that what they could do was not controlling Lily's behavior, but talk to Lily about this issue. Ask her, how did she think that having sexual intercourses with anyone would satisfy her need for love? Talk to her about that. Talk to her about how this didn't appear a shortcut with respect to the other path offered, that was the process of recovery in a rehabilitation center. But as you can see, these are two completely different kind of relationship and kind of conversation that we can have with clients. The focus on behaviors lead to conversation in terms of right, wrong. This is right, this is wrong. And if this is wrong, we need to correct you. Instead, moving to the needs behind these behaviors, we can have conversation on emotion, desire, fears, something that can become a plan for the future. In fact, talking to Lily about these issues, she finally could say, talk about her fear of not being loved, but also finally, also of her fear not to be able to cope with the program. So there was a fear in that sense. Lily was saying, I want to do the program, and at the same time, I don't. But not because she is crazy, because she had fear of not making it. Okay? So, distinguishing reasons from solution goals from strategies protects professionals from a blameful position, the right and wrong position, and help them to take instead a therapeutic, caring, dialogical position. Okay? So why don't you take 5 minutes and talk and reflect on these ideas that we presented up to now. Okay, so let's move on to another point which I think is very important with respect to this principle of searching for meanings as a basic, I think, methodological principle that changes not only the way we work with clients, but it changes the way we conceive the work in psychiatry, okay? So it's not just a matter of a technique in a way, it's a matter of a different culture of what our profession is. So the search for meanings is also supported by the deconstruction of dominant beliefs. Now, what are the dominant beliefs? Dominant beliefs are those that are taken for granted in a community. It's what usually is called common sense. So the ideas that, orient behaviors, relationship, organization, structure, and everything in institution, in a community, and that are never challenged or discussed, that are taken for reality. They are ideas, but they are treated by people as if they were reality. For example, I give example from Italy, of course, and one of the ideas that you could hear in Italy everywhere is a child needs a mom and a dad. And this is considered like the natural law of the family. When we all know that children, need people that love them, and there could be two women, two men, a man and a woman, just a woman, just a man, maybe some uncles or aunts or grandparents or whatever. But this is, when people say that, they don't even discuss it, they don't justify it, they don't explain, because are self-evident beliefs, okay? And they are very dangerous, because since they are so self-evident and taken for granted, they orient people. And we should be, as professionals, humble enough to say that we are not an elite. We are part of the community, so somehow we share this common sense and these dominant beliefs. We are not from a different planet. We are part of the same community as our clients, and we share with them these taken for granted ideas, which are then dominant. Dominant, what does it mean? They are not discussed, they are not challenged, they are not even, when I say they are not discussed, they don't even go and see what they really mean. When someone says, a kid needs a mom and a dad, if you ask why, because it needs a mom and a dad. I mean, it's like, what are you asking me? So evident, why should I discuss it or explain it? Okay, this is when, these ideas are not only dominant, they become oppressive. Oppressive of what? Of all the people that represent somehow a difference with respect to what these ideas state and claim. Okay, so they become oppressive and excluding. Now, the one of the major issue with respect to this theme of common sense or dominant ideas is, how are we professionals aware of how much these ideas can, guide our practice? And the question is it possible that we act professionally according to these ideas without being aware? Because these ideas are what I call blind spot. The blind spot is the perspective from where I don't see that I don't see. I give, the example is the mirror on the car. There's always a point that the car coming from behind disappears and then appears again. Now, the blind spot means that we don't know that we don't see what is there, okay? And so it could happen that we use these ideas that I say are dominant, oppressive, and excluding in our practice without being aware. That's why we need to practice irreverence and self-reflectivity. Irreverence is what Gianfranco Cecchin thought it was this position of, discussing, critiquing, challenging our own premises. But of course, in order to be able to discuss and critique and change our own premises, we have to become aware of what our premises are. So self-reflexivity is another important principle, methodological principle that we need to practice. And I think that self-reflexivity is not an individualistic practice for professionals, but it's a community, it's a team practice, because self-reflectivity can give results that is become aware of our premises if we compare what we think with what others think. Otherwise, we ourselves could get into a mood of not self-reflexivity, but of self-reference. So convincing ourselves that what we think is good, okay? So self-reflexivity is a collective practice that helps us to understand how much in our practice we, are guided by these common sense ideas. One of the dominant idea, which I think is an obstacle for the search for meaning, is the idea of motherhood. Okay, so let me give you the story of two women. These stories are, as you can see, seems parallel, almost the same. But these are stories. These two women were in two different services with different teams. Okay, so the professionals were not treating the same. Okay, one is Vanessa. Vanessa is hospitalized for a relapse due to heroin addiction after a long period of abstinence. She is 31 years old, lives with her parents and 2.5-year-old daughter, Rose. Vanessa's parents are both elderly and poor in poor health. She has a sister, Hilary, who is married with 2 children. Vanessa, 5 years ago, met Johnny, and who was already a drug addict. They went live together, and she also started using heroin and cocaine. After 3 years of cohabitation, Vanessa left Johnny, but afterwards she discovered that she was pregnant, and she decided to keep the baby. She told him that she was going to keep the baby, but Johnny said he was not interested in having a family. So Vanessa stopped using drugs by herself because of the pregnancy. She had the baby, Rose, and started to work as a cleaner and live with her parents. She, after 6 months, Johnny appeared and asked for the legitimation of Rose, who meanwhile had taken the last name of Vanessa, of course. But he, wanted to be recognized as father. She refused. He went to court to, wanting his rights to Rose, but the court said that no, he hadn't any right. And after that, he just disappeared, and that was the end. Then, 2 years later, Vanessa starts using drug again. And she does it at, high level and spend all the savings. And, she is at risk of being, signalized by the social service to the court because sometimes she doesn't go home. So the little girl is with the parents who are elderly, so they call Hilary, the sister, and the situation becomes very, very at risk. At that point, just before the social services had to intervene, she decided to go to a drug addict service to start detoxification. Okay, so there she is, and as I said, the program is detoxification, start a rehabilitation program for at least a year in a community residential center. So the thing was to decide where Rose would be. And so they said Rose will be with Hilary, the sister, because the grandparents were too old. During this period, Vanessa started asking questions about and what is Rose going to do? Will I be able to see her? And kept asking this kind of question. Now, the professional, in front of this request, just said, she'll be with your sister while you are taking care of yourself. You will, detox, you will be rehabilitated, so you can then take Rose with you. But Vanessa became more and more anxious, to the point that she started developing what the professional defined paranoid symptoms. And what are the paranoid symptoms she had? She started thinking that social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists were going to take away her daughter from her. So the professional would reassure her, no, we are not going to take your daughter away. You cannot have her now because you cannot take care of her, but then after you have cured yourself, you can have it. But this was not reassuring at all for Vanessa, who began more and more anxious, very agitated, to the point that the professional thought, she would not be able to cope with the rehabilitation program. This is Vanessa's stories. Nora is 27 years old. She has 1.5-year-old son, Robin, and her partner and father of the son, Dennis, is also a drug addict. So after a period after Nora became pregnant, she also left the partner and started a detoxification program. She was kind of here and there, but she was good enough to attend, the meeting she was supposed, and so on. Now, at a certain point, the professional thought that Nora could go, since the son was so little, could go into a community with we call it mother-child community. So the mothers can keep the child with them in the community. When they offered, they said this proposal to Nora, at the beginning she was very happy. But then as time goes, she started being anxious. She started being anxious, and again, she started making all these questions to the professionals. But what about my son? But are you going to take him away from me? And again, the same story. And again, the professional saying, no, you need though first to take care of yourself, then you will be able to, and so on. Now, interesting enough, the professional, they didn't talk about paranoid symptoms. They gave an interpretation. They thought, maybe she is not ready to be a mother because she, after all, she spent such few time with his baby. So probably she is anxious because she doesn't feel to be a mother. She is not ready for it. So what they did was to call Nora and say, oh, we understood your problem. You don't feel ready to be a mother, so we decided that you will go in a community without your son. And of course, the reaction was that Nora was more and more anxious, to the point that they decided not to start the rehabilitation program. Now, what I want you to think about is, what idea of motherhood did these professionals have to be unable to understand these women's request? If you think of it, what they think in terms of paranoid symptoms or not being ready to be a mother has to do with the fact that these women were anxious in front of the idea of not having their child next to them. And what they responded to this anxiety was, yeah, but we suspend your motherhood for the time being, and you'll be able to be a mother after you have taken care of you. Now, the idea behind this is that a mother, in order to be a good mother, has to keep the child next to her. And this is a very strong idea that if you go and see the manuals, the psychological manuals about good parenting, good motherhood, the first point is mother has to live the child with her. So presence has become the first criteria for the evaluation of motherhood. And evidently, this is shared in these cases both by professionals and by the clients. They both have the same concern. Vanessa and Vera think, can I be a mother without having my child with me? And the professional confirmed them saying, yes, you cannot be a mother until you don't have your child with you. You can only be a mother after. So I think this is like a iatrogenic, idea. It's an idea that develops illness because it poses the person in front of a paradox. In order to be a good mother, you have to suspend to be a mother. How do you prove to be a good mother? Just saying you are not a mother for the moment, as if motherhood could be something intermittent, like the electricity, on, off, on, off, on, off. Like an identity could be just now I am, now I am not, now I am, now I'm not. So when I suggested the professional to think about this, to think about the idea of the crazy idea that motherhood could be, at phases, once yes, once no. And I said, what can we instead, how can we see motherhood as something that stays across different circumstances, not according the circumstances? And so the idea of motherhood that stays across the different circumstances is the idea of not the mother having the child present, but the mother thinking of the well-being of the child. So mother that, for example, don't like to grow her child in a community for drug addict is a mother that is caring for the child. So she was not saying, I'm not ready. She was saying, I'm acting like a mother concerned for the child not living in a community of drug addicts. When Vanessa was fearing that someone could take away her child, was responding to this message, take care of yourself. Only after you have taken care of yourself, you can. So her fear, as they all have, of not being able to do the program of rehabilitation had at the end the possibility that the child could have been taken away. So these messages are, as I said, iatrogenic messages and come from a common sense belief supported by psychology as well. We have to remember that, and some sort of psychology, and so instead, of having this not reassuring conversation, we then came out with the idea of saying, you are taking care of your child by accepting of separating. Because it is exactly by separating from him that you show that you are a mother, a good mother, taking care. So you will not have to demonstrate to be a good mother, because you are already a good mother. It is by taking care of yourself that you are a good mother. So again, you can see how different conversation you can have starting from this premise instead of the other blameful, one. Now, the construction of dominant beliefs prevents professionals from a judgmental and pathologizing position in favor of position that is inclusive of the differences. Inclusive of the difference, in this case, of many ways of being mother, for example. And of course, we have many other differences. I put there, gender, motherhood, parenting, family, sexual orientation, race, identity, culture. These are all dominant beliefs that we need to deconstruct. Us being, most of us, family therapists, I think we need to think of what idea of family we have in mind and what is orienting our activity. And without shame and with great humility, we have to consider that most of the time the family we have in mind is the middle class, white, heterosexual family, because it's so rooted in our culture that we should be humble enough to think, I might have the same idea, and that's when it starts, irreverence and distancing from this dominant reflection. The last thing I want to say, I want to leave some time for your questions and comments. It's the search for meaning is supported by an evolutionary perspective, which is implemented through divergent thinking instead of convergent thinking. Convergent thinking looks for confirmation. Divergent thinking looks for differences, novelties, considers each event new, focuses in micro-transition without, hoping the change with the C, capital C, and helps a person to reveal resources. I just want to briefly give you this description of this case, which was, to me, astonishing. Now, this is the case of a man, a young man, 27 years old. I will go quickly because I also want to leave time for you. He was the worst patient of the community. I mean, aggressive. He would really beat up people just walking by in the street. I mean, very dangerous. And was though in this residential center, which is open, which means that, residential center means that they can go out if they want. Of course, they have to say professional, I'm going to take a walk, but they can do it if they want. Okay, so problems over problems. The family was mother, father divorced. Father had a new wife, and then there is a sister living with mother. The two parents have been fighting since divorce, like 15 years ago. They fight all the time. They never agree on nothing. A family therapist that had seen the family had seen them once, and at the end she wrote, it's impossible to do family therapy with this family. They fight so much that until they fight like that, nothing is possible. I mean, she was desperate. And in this situation, all of a sudden, parents together go and see the psychiatrist and say, we want to take our son to a town 900 kilometers away for a family, big family Sicilian reunion. Big, okay? So the psychiatrist was like, and the professor was astonished. They said, are you kidding? Are you going to take him? Do you know what it could happen? Everything. I mean, everything. Are you serious? But then the parents get angrier and angrier with the professional because they wanted his son going and attend the family reunion. So there they go, angry. The sister and the father's wife came. They wanted to take Paul to the family reunion. And the professional was scared of what could have happened. I mean, this man was beating up people just because they looked at him, right? So they were very scared and responsible, for whatever it could happen. So they asked for a supervision, and I suggested, see, what is different? What is different in the behavior of this family? For the first time, they all agree. For the first time, they were thinking of a scenario, of a context in which Paul had to be good. And they thought he could be good. So, I said, if this is the context, the family context, so changed, we have to think, because we believe it, that context is important, that also Paul will be different in a different context. So let's take the risk. Of course, they asked the family, who was so determined to take Paul to the reunion, they asked to sign that they were taking the responsibility for that. And this made them, supported the possibility of a divergent thinking better. But incredibly, things went very well. Nothing happened. But not only that, and this is important, it's not that nothing happened. So actually, Paul was different in a different context, in a changed context. But then the relationship between the professionals and the family changed. So new meetings were possible, and now Paul is not home too much, but he's in an apartment, what we call a supervised apartment. I mean, they live alone, but there is always someone going and check if they need something or what else. And he's living there. So, the divergent thinking is very helpful, very helpful. It's risky, but very helpful in a situation of psychiatry where chronicity is, most of the time what happened, the process. While, looking for difference, novelties, what is new in the situation exactly helps not to be in the process of chronicity, because chronicity is not linked to the seriousness of the problem, but is linked to the fact that we keep seeing the problem over and over again. So there were many other things I wanted to say, but I have no time for that. And I want to finish my presentation underlying that I see our intervention as an ethical and political stance. So working in this way is not just a technique, is an implementation of an ethical stance, I think, based on the respect of clients' intersubjectivity and subjectivity. So being able to be in relationship and having a proper point of view, feelings, emotion, and so on, Working in this way is also the implementation of a cultural, political stance that proposes a different way of treating mental illness and a different conception of what the psychiatric work could be. And working in this way may trigger a bottom-up process. I'm optimistic on this, that from the interpersonal level of our relationship with our clients can reach the social level in terms of an inclusive and respectful way of thinking of people's dignity, social relationship, and community living. Thank you. Okay, if you want to make some comment or ask question.
Hi, I'm Annette. We had a talk here just before and had the assumption that when people come to you, they know how you work and are open for that way of thinking. Do you have some good advice for us that meet people that are not in the same way open or ready to think the way you propose? Mm-hmm. How to connect with each other?
I don't have magical strategies. All I have is, talking about these ideas, offering these ideas. I usually consult with teams that are made of nurses, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers sometimes, and all working in the psychiatric field. Now, usually I am invited by the psychologist, who's also systemic, and while the psychiatrists have usually a cognitive behavioral training, and nurses no training, just the regular training for nurses. So most of them are not even used to a certain language, okay? But they usually start from an idea that is from a position. It's not an idea, position. They don't know what to do with a client, for example, which is usually the reason why they ask me, okay? So it starts from, we don't know what to do with these clients. And it implies an ethical position for them, because not knowing what to do, they still want to do something. So, of course, we are talking of different perspectives, but, the ontological base of our profession, that is, we want to help people to be better, okay? So they usually are in this position. We don't know what to do. So when I suggest these different kind of questions, when I suggest to connect observation, which is what I usually do, as I described, if they only see the possibility of talking in a different way, that made them feel better, which is, compared to doing nothing, well, let's try this. And to me, this is already like the first move, because they see something different that they can do. The most important thing is to have the right questions to raise in order to put people in this position. So, for example, as I was saying, the difference between reasons, needs, and solutions, I think it's important to raise the question, in which way can we say that this behavior, that is the solution, usually the symptomatic behaviors, is a response to a need? This question kind of puts you in a perspective that is not anymore a perspective of it's right, it's wrong, but what could it be that is, And it is a provocative question, because what you do is taking the wrong behavior and define it as a solution, which should be changed because it appears dysfunctional. But then it could be changed in a dialogical way, talking to the person. So the way of asking questions, what is the story of this person? In which way this person is making sense of his story? I think that the question and the way to formulate the question is more important than the answer we have. If we want to change, to help people to go into a different thinking, as they were saying, the colleagues that were saying today. I don't think that we change perspective or see things in a different way just by telling people how they have to see. But it's by raising the right question that you can put them in a different perspective, which then can help them to see things in a different way.
Thank you very much. Laura, I was just thinking that yesterday you said that you don't offer people solutions, you offer them meaning. And during your presentation, I was thinking, you just don't offer meaning, you also offer dignifying. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your attention.
And now we have 15 minutes, that is 15 minutes break.